For more than a decade they searched for a monster, a killer who seemed to vanish without a trace, a man who targeted women, dumped their bodies along a remote stretch of Long Island shoreline, and somehow remained invisible. For nearly 3 years, the accused serial killer maintained his innocence. Then, on June 17, 2026, families who had spent decades waiting for answers finally came face to face with the man responsible for some of the most infamous murders in American history. And what happened inside that courtroom would bring one of the nation's longest-running serial killer investigations to a dramatic end. This is the story of Rex Heuermann, the man prosecutors identified as the Long Island serial killer, and how a case that remained unsolved for more than a decade was ultimately broken apart by technology, persistence, and a series of mistakes made by a killer who believed he would never be caught. Long before investigators knew the name Rex Heuermann, they knew something far more terrifying. There was a serial killer operating on Long Island. The realization emerged gradually. At first, authorities believed they were searching for a single missing woman. But as search teams moved through the brush near Gilgo Beach, they began making discovery after discovery. Human remains, then more remains, and then even more. What had started as a missing persons investigation was rapidly transforming into something much darker. A serial murder case unlike anything Long Island had ever seen. As investigators worked to identify the victims, a disturbing pattern emerged. Most were women, many had disappeared years apart, and whoever was responsible had managed to avoid detection for an astonishing amount of time. For the families, every passing year brought more frustration, more uncertainty, and fewer answers, because despite the growing body count, the killer remained unidentified, and investigators were about to discover just how difficult he would be to catch. Years turned into a decade. The investigation expanded. New evidence was reviewed. Old theories were abandoned. Task forces came and went. Yet the mystery remained unsolved. The killer appeared to have planned carefully. There were no obvious suspects. No eyewitnesses are capable of identifying him, and no clear path toward an arrest. To many observers, the Long Island serial killer was beginning to look like a ghost. Someone who had committed multiple murders and disappeared completely. But behind the scenes, technology was quietly changing. The tools available to investigators were becoming more sophisticated. DNA science was advancing. Digital forensics was evolving. And eventually, those advancements would bring detectives closer to the truth than ever before. Because somewhere on Long Island, a man was living what appeared to be an ordinary life. Going to work, returning home, blending into the community, completely unaware that investigators were slowly building a case that would one day destroy everything. And when they finally identified him, the evidence waiting for them would be overwhelming. For years, the investigation seemed trapped. Detectives had victims. They had crime scenes. They had theories. What they didn't have was a name. Then everything changed. A new task force was assembled. Investigators began re-examining evidence that had sat untouched for years. Every phone record, every witness statement, every digital breadcrumb left behind. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. The breakthrough came through technology. According to prosecutors, cell phone records placed a single individual in contact with multiple victims before they vanished. It wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was enough to focus attention on one man, Rex Heuermann, an architect living what appeared to be an ordinary suburban life. A husband, a father, a business owner, the kind of person neighbors passed every day without a second thought. Yet behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building a case. And the evidence they were uncovering was becoming increasingly difficult to explain away. Because cell phone data was only the beginning. What detectives found next would push the investigation into entirely new territory. Serial killers often believe they can outsmart investigators. Many do for years. Some even do for decades. But no matter how careful a person is, they almost always leave something behind. In this case, prosecutors say that something was DNA. Investigators collected discarded items connected to Heuermann. Items he likely never imagined would one day be used against him. Scientists then compared genetic material recovered from evidence connected to the murders. Using advanced forensic techniques, analysts examined highly degraded hair fragments that had remained mysteries for years. According to prosecutors, the results pointed directly toward Heuermann. For the families, it was the first major sign that answers might finally be coming. For investigators, it was confirmation that they were heading in the right direction. And for Heuermann, although he didn't know it yet, the walls were closing in. Because detectives weren't simply building a murder case. They were assembling what they believed was the blueprint of a serial killer. The investigation didn't stop with DNA. Authorities also examined Heuermann's digital devices, computers, storage systems, electronic records. And according to prosecutors, what they discovered was chilling. Investigators say they found documents that appeared to outline details related to planning, committing, and concealing murders. A blueprint, not necessarily for a single crime, but for a method. a system, a way of operating. The discovery would become one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire case, because it suggested planning, preparation, and intent. The image prosecutors presented was not of a man acting impulsively, it was of someone who allegedly spent years refining his methods while avoiding detection. For over a decade, the Long Island serial killer had remained a mystery. Now detectives believed they finally knew who he was, and they were ready to make their move. July 2023. After years of investigation, surveillance, forensic analysis, and digital evidence collection, authorities moved in. Rex Heuermann was arrested. The announcement shocked the nation. News crews descended on Long Island. Neighbors watched as investigators searched his property. Many struggled to understand how someone accused of such horrific crimes could have lived among them for so long. But while the arrest brought relief, it didn't bring closure. Because Heuermann maintained his innocence, the legal battle was only beginning. And the families who had waited years for answers would have to wait even longer. For nearly 3 years, prosecutors continued preparing their case. Evidence was reviewed, arguments were crafted, and everyone expected one thing: a trial. What happened instead caught many by surprise. April 8, 2026. The courtroom was prepared for another day of legal proceedings. Then came a stunning development. Rex Heuermann pleaded guilty. For years, investigators had worked to identify the Long Island serial killer. Now, according to court records, Heuermann admitted responsibility for 8 murders. The confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Families who had spent decades searching for answers were finally hearing words many feared they would never hear. An admission. The man prosecutors identified as the Long Island serial killer had acknowledged responsibility for the deaths of 8 women. June 17, 2026. Then came the sentence. Multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. No release. No second chance. No possibility of freedom. The man who once seemed untouchable would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Judge Timothy Motze condemned Heuermann's actions and formally brought one of the most notorious serial murder cases in modern American history to a close. For the families, the sentence could never restore what had been taken, but it provided something many thought they might never receive: accountability. For years, the Long Island serial killer existed as a mystery, a faceless predator hidden somewhere among millions of people, a case that frustrated investigators, haunted families, and captured national attention. The story of Rex Heuermann serves as a reminder that even the coldest cases are not truly forgotten. Sometimes justice takes years, sometimes it takes decades, but for the families of these 8 women, that journey finally reached its conclusion. And while the scars left behind may never fully heal, the man responsible will never again walk free. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to see more in-depth true crime investigations, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future cases. And let me know in the comments, what part of this investigation surprised you the most? Was it the DNA evidence, the digital trail, or the guilty plea that finally ended one of America's most infamous serial killer mysteries? Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.